Dearest Mother, my passions for the brave and new, for adventure, have led me far and wide. From embracing the helm of our home city's newspaper to serving in a political office while I was there, I was able to develop strong skills that served me well in dealing with those around me. However, it was that passion for the brave and new that caused me to leave your warm and loving home, to leave the safety Father had offered me in his mercantile business and chase those dreams of building an empire. With a spurt in the gold fields that found me wealthy, not from gold but from building a business that provided tools to all those would-be millionaires, came a nest egg that allowed me my next move. I moved on to San Francisco, and with my Goldfield funds was able to build a newspaper that rivaled all those on the East Coast. As was in line with my character, however, I found that my roots were having difficulty finding adequate soil. So I sold the paper for a song and signed on to herd cattle from Texas to Kansas on the Chisholm Trail. I so enjoyed the opportunity to ride for hours on end, and working cattle became a salve for my soul. The work was hard, and the hours were indeed long, but I felt satisfied for a time. As I watched Mr. Santorum collect checks for $40 a head at the rail, then I collected my wages of $25 for a month of choking on the dust left by the thousands of hooves I'd been trailing, I realized I could do just as well for myself as the owner of those cattle. My song of a sale of my newspaper had done pretty well in the bank, and I headed to San Francisco to remove my funds. The Homestead Act had allowed me to settle a small piece of land in a river valley in the eastern part of Oregon. I acquired a herd of sheep that did very well on the land. As my bands grew, my neighbors began to give up their fight for life on the land. I was able to purchase many of their homesteads for very little money, whatever it took to get them moved on down the road. In a matter of years, my land holdings had increased to 7,000 acres, and I had traded my sheep for cattle. As I paid more attention to the business aspects of the cattle, my bank accounts merely grew, and with wise decisions being made with every penny and every head of beef, I was able to buy a lot of wonderful pasture and increase my land and my livestock holdings to the point of making me a baron of cattle. At this point, I had more than 40 men in my employ year-round, and many of them were most impressive as businessmen who have since gone on to start their own operations. Regardless of my success, Mother, I still longed to move on to the other side of the hill. I had always heard of a life of peace, a life of hope, a life of eternal gratefulness. Although I'd touched so many things that had turned into proverbial gold, I still had an emptiness inside. A circuit riding preacher had come through one of our cow camps while I was on the trail, and I tried not to listen too closely to what he had to say. It seemed as if he were just preaching to the downtrodden, to the poor, to a lot of those other guys, and I wasn't one of them. He spoke of a life of peace, of joy, of abundance. I had the abundance, and I was certain that could buy me the joy. So I amassed my fortunes, and when I had become as successful and as joyful as I'd ever been, I realized that I still had little, if any, peace. So I began to search, and I read in the prophets of old, Daniel, Isaiah, and others, of a Savior to come, a Messiah. They spoke of his saving of mankind, of their hearts, their lives. One spoke of him as Emmanuel, God with us. I thought of how wonderful it would be to have God actually with us. I'd never seen him as much more than a distant creator, if that. He had never provided me with any more than I had worked for myself. However, I marveled at the idea of a Savior, a man-God who would come to spend his life on me and give me life in return. So my quest began. I searched for the signs of this coming king for years. Between calving heifers and feeding loose hay, I would spend my time in a line shack studying this king. I began to wonder what life would be like if I were to merely know this king. Years later, I came to the realization that I need only to bow down at this king's feet and to offer him all that I had. I came to this king in a time of great rejoicing. The prophets, the writings, all pointed to him. I'd asked where I could find him, and the direction came. I left all I knew to make the trip to find him. The miles turned into days, the days into months, and when I finally knelt before this king, I dropped my head and I offered him gold, a gift fit for a king, but even more so, a gift that required all of me. I laid my land at his feet. I laid my cattle at his feet. I laid my life at his feet. Mother, this Savior, this King, is Jesus Christ. And when he was born on that Christmas, the first to meet him were a bunch of ragtag sheep herders out on a night's watch. They had nothing to lose by bowing at his feet. I had what I thought was everything to lose. I had holdings. I had success. I had a fleet of folks depending on me for their livelihood. What would my life crumble to if I were to lay it all down? Where would this king send me? What would he give? What would he take away? As I laid my gift of gold, everything I held dear in my life, everything I had hung on to with my life, as I laid it down at the feet of this king, my questions were answered. What would my life crumble to? It would crumble to a brand new starting point. His word told me that if I were only in him, I would become a new creation. For me, that wasn't all that poor of a proposition, as I'd grown accustomed to starting over. This was different, however. I would not just begin a new venture, I would become a new creation. A new creation. Where would this king send me? He would send me into those places that brought me to life. He would put me in charge of talents, of kingdoms, of ranches that I would be able to enliven with the personality and the gifts with which he has blessed me. His word assured me that if I were only to delight in him, then he would give me the desires of my heart. The amazing thing is that if I were to delight in him, the desires of my heart would line up with his will. What would this king give me? He'd give me life, and life to the fullest. He would take away fear, and he'd give me a spirit of power and of love and of a sound mind. He would provide for my every need without the struggle and strife I would normally have put forth in order to provide for myself. He'd give me forever with him, with his authority and his passion for others. He'd give me more than I could ever give myself. What would he take away? He'd take away fear. He'd take away my guilt. He would take away uncertainty. He would take away the power of the enemy who causes worry, who tempts, who lies, who tries to tear us apart from the soul outward. What would he take away? Everything with which the enemy has attacked us. Mother, this king is worth so much more than gold. He's worth everything I could ever offer. He's worth my life, and once I knelt down and offered him my life, he gave it right back to me, bigger and more joyful and more abundant than I could ever have designed. This King is the King of Kings, and He is my Jesus. I sought Him. I found Him. And you know what, Mother? Wise men still do seek Him. Wise men still do find Him. And I can only hope you will seek this King for yourself, dear Mother. I would love to live forever with you, as well as with all those who have sought Him and knelt at His feet. Dearest Mother, remember the signs. Seek them out and follow them all the way to God with us. Your son, Jasper.